Hello, welcome everyone to our panel discussion today. Maybe we give people a minute to join. Some people are already online, but yeah, quite a few people are online already, so I think we can start with the introduction. So yeah, welcome again to our panel, Making Sense of the EUDR, Clarity on What Still Confuses the Market. This is exactly what we will talk about today. So we will look at different topics that are a little bit controversial or where there's a lot of discussion or definitely not a lot of clarity for many people, and try to give you the most accurate information on these topics. With me today, I have two expert speakers on the topic. On the one hand, we have Constanze Schweidmann, who is a senior associate at the global law firm CMS. Hi, Constanze, and
Hi,
thanks for
everyone.
joining us.
Thank you.
And then we have Rob Shaw from PLC International, who is the head of standards and integrity and also an expert on the EU Deforestation Regulation. Thanks for joining us today, Rob.
No problem. You're too kind, but yeah, nice to be here.
Always a pleasure. So a few administrative things. We want to start with a few topics that we pre-selected that we know are controversial about the EUDR or debated. We will discuss those for around maybe 20-25 minutes. Let's see how long we take. But then we have reserved still another 20 minutes, let's say, for your questions. So whenever you have a question comes to your mind or something you wanted to ask the whole time, or it's not clear to you about the EUDR, you can use it. You can use the Q&A feature, which is on the right-hand side on the panel. There are two little speech bubbles. When you click on this, you can post your question, and then we see it, and then we will take it up in the second half of the session, basically, and answers it to the best of our abilities. Also, this session will be recorded, so if you have to jump, that's not a problem. We will automatically send you the recording after the session. And yeah, that's already pretty much everything as far as the intro goes. And I would suggest we jump right in. Originally, we want to, or maybe we start with the new category benchmarking, the country benchmarking. So because it's quite a hot topic, as many of you know, there has been a vote in the European Parliament. So maybe, Constanze, I can ask you, was this vote, the European Parliament voted on something related to the benchmarking? Does this now mean that the benchmarking is no longer valid?
Yeah, thank you for this very important question, because I think that's a perception which caught a bit of confusion for many. So we have received the country benchmarking in June, I think it was, a bit earlier than expected, where the Commission set out all countries of the world into a low, medium, and high risk category, which is quite important for EUDR compliance. So we were all happy to receive it, I believe. Right, and then there was a bit of a confusion, as you said. But for now, what is important to understand is that the country benchmarking exists as it was published in June, so it's still valid, and the vote was just a criticism by the European Parliament, because many states and actors wanted to include the no risk category into the benchmarking, but this is not this was also only like part of a criticism, but it doesn't have any implications for the country benchmarking as it is currently existing.
So there's no legal value. It's more like an opinion by a group of parliamentarians who were the majority towards the Commission. So it's political pressure, but it's no clear mandate. It's no there's no obligation behind it now. But there is political pressure, obviously.
Yeah, that's important to understand. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe the country benchmarking for those who don't know what we're talking about. I just thought maybe we could clarify a little bit. Maybe Rob, you could describe a little bit what it means. We have these three categories, right? Low, standard, and high risk. When I buy something from a supplier in a low risk country, let's say I buy furniture to sell in Germany, does this mean the low risk obligations apply, or how does it work exactly?
So the starting off with the high risk, there's only 4 countries in the high risk, and it appears to be overtly political because it's Russia and North Korea, Myanmar, etc. And so that's really to recognise that there shouldn't be any trade with these countries because they just can't be trusted, and in fact some of the countries even have sanctions against them. The big confusions between the standard risk and the low risk, and especially now that there's all this talk of a zero risk category, which doesn't exist, is that people think that the low risk category gives you big options out of the regulation, which is not true. You still have to do due diligence for the low risk category, and you still have to provide geolocation. The trick is that the due diligence is simplified, and this is very well explained in the EUDR FAQs on the EUDR implementation website. And in fact, the FAQs were last updated, I think, in April. So we're now on version 4 of the FAQs. So rather than going into too much detail, the myths that we can dispel is that there is no such thing as a zero risk category, and the standard and the high risk, well, all categories do require due diligence to be done. Obviously, the level of due diligence which a company has to do depends upon the risk within a country, which is not just restricted to the EU broad definition and benchmarking decision of risk. If people have been operating under EUTR, then they should realize that there's very little difference between the due diligence requirements in EUTR and EUDR, although there are some certain additions in terms of legality of production, and in forestry where they're talking about tree harvesting and other insertions such as looking out for indigenous people's rights, etc. So it's very important that people do go to the FAQs and have a read of them, because there are pages and pages of questions posed and answers given.
Yeah, I also just posted the link in the chat for anyone interested. There you can find them. Sorry, Constance, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, I just wanted to emphasize what Rob just said regarding the geolocation data, because that's really the most important part to emphasize, that the geolocation data is still required even though you have a low risk category country, which also means that companies have to track back their product until the country of production and the specific plot where that product was grown on.
And I think this is also important clarification, because the country risk level applies not to where my supplier is, but where the product originally was, where the commodity was produced, where the commodity was grown. So this is maybe important. You have to trace it back, and then wherever that is where you apply the country risk level.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, if you have wooden furniture which was produced from timber grown in Brazil, then you have to trace that back, the timber back to the plot where it was grown in Brazil.
Exactly. Okay, but let's go back to this vote and what it now means. So basically, maybe Rob, what are your views on what are the next steps? What can happen now to EUDR, because there's lots of uncertainty around this. What does it mean, basically?
Yeah, well, as Constance says, and this is only my own personal reading of the situation from various media sources, this is all designed to put political pressure onto the Commission. And so there are various things that may happen. I mean, they may of course decide to repeal the legislation, which is very unlikely. they may decide to rework the country benchmarking, and of course that would probably imply a delay to the implementation of the regulation. And we have our ears to the ground in Brussels, and we're hearing that there isn't much appetite officially to do that. And of course, we've already had one delay or one extension, which depending on which way you look at it. So personally, I feel that the Commission will very much stand firm and try and get the implementation started on time. Of course, you know, I could be completely wrong, but my message to certified organizations is, in the PEFC world, and also any organization subject to the regulation, is do not delay, because if you assume there will be a delay, then you're going to be very upset come the 1st of January, because you're going to find yourself in an active regulation which you're not prepared for. So there's only 4 or 5 months left to get ready now, as it were. So
yeah, it's a big gamble if you decide to just wait and see now.
And what we also hear from many clients at the moment is that people are a bit sick of this back and forth regarding the implementation, regarding the EUDR, regarding any changes. They just want clarity. And from what I hear, I feel like many companies would just be happy if there would be a clear opinion that the EUDR will not be delayed another 6 months, 1 year, whatever, which I personally cannot really, I can't imagine that it will be postponed again, because then everyone will be just confused. And but that's just my personal opinion. Obviously, I don't have any insights, but I can hardly imagine this back and forth going on, because it has already caused so much confusion, and companies are actually preparing, and that's our advice. As Rob said, everyone should be trying to be ready by the end of this year.
So basically, I think advice to summarize is, first of all, to keep calm, because this hasn't been a legally binding vote. It's just an opinion. Then it makes sense to get ready and prepared, because otherwise you would have not enough time. And also one thing to keep in mind is I think the things take time. So if you want to get ready on time, because it might, you know, it looks like it will get into force as planned. In order to be on time, it makes sense to especially engage the suppliers early, get all the information, all the data you need now to be ready. Then let's move on to the next topic. I think there has also been a little bit of a controversy about China being classified as a low-risk country in the benchmarking, I think, if I remember correctly. But I mean, that was not the biggest controversy, but still, there's also another topic around China that is getting a lot of attention, which is there's the rumor or the myth we see about that Chinese company are legally not permitted to share the geolocation information of their plots. What is this the truth, or what is the situation, Constanze?
Yeah, I think that's a question which many companies in the EU are asking themselves. It was, as I remember correctly, also part of an FAQ. I'm not sure if it exactly said China, but what do we do if we don't get any geolocation data? And in many cases, it just concerns China, because Chinese suppliers seem to be very reluctant in supplying this geolocation data, which, as you all know, is a requirement under the EUDR, even for a low-risk country like China. And the easy answer is that it is not explicitly prohibited by Chinese law to share geolocation data to the EU. So this is proven, and that's not me as a German lawyer saying that, but our Chinese colleagues who worked on that issue and provided us with the insights. What is correct is that Chinese law has many regulations regarding what kind of information can be shared, and this explicitly relates to the surveying and mapping law, data security law, and personal information protection law. So these three laws do include a lot of restrictions. However, if you deal with these topics and take them into account when sharing the geolocation data, then it should be fine sharing these. So clearly saying that there is no explicit prohibition, but for example, regarding surveying and mapping law, what is clear is that, for example, plots of a Chinese country where, for example, timber is being harvested that is very close to a military facility, for example. For this, it could be a bit difficult to supply the geolocation data because, for example, in the Chinese law, there's regulations that any geolocation close to military facilities, for example, are restricted in sharing. So it's really based on a case-by-case law where the specific plot is located. And when I mean plot, I mean the ground where the product is grown on or the commodity is grown on. And that's why it has to be checked on a case-by-case basis. If you want to know more about that, because me as a German lawyer can only replicate what my Chinese colleagues are saying, then you are warmly invited to a webinar which we will host on the 4th of August together with our Chinese colleagues. Maybe Andreas, you can share the link.
Share the link, yeah.
Perfect. And there we have a whole webinar on how geolocation data sharing is possible from China, because it's probably, even if you're a European company, it could be very interesting for you to also develop with your Chinese suppliers, for example, what kind of troubles they have supplying the geolocation data, and especially what they are fearing, because what we feel is that it's often about a fear that Chinese suppliers don't want to submit anything to the EU because they fear that they violate their local laws. So that's why it's important to engage with suppliers and understand their problems there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, who wants to know more? The link's in the chat. And now we do a hard turn to something entirely different, which is secondhand and recycled material. So if I have, if I'm selling products that are made that contain wood chips that are out of secondhand material or recycled, does the EUDR apply? Yes or no? And what are the uncertainties around this, Rob?
Yeah, so starting off with recycled, the regulation and the FAQs are quite clear. If material has been sourced through a waste stream, and therefore the commodity or the previous product has reached the end of its life, so for example, transport pallets which are broken and can no longer be used are turned into waferized chips, then that would be a recycled raw material input into a product such as chipboard, for example. So if you're making chipboard and you're making it from 100% recycled raw ingredients, then your chipboard product, if it's 100% recycled, is exempt from the EUDR regulations. However, if you're making a product like chipboard or MDF and you're using a mix of virgin fiber and recycled materials from waste stream, then the virgin fiber content is captured by the regulation, and therefore you would need to submit due diligence and geolocation for where the virgin fiber was grown. And that goes for any kind of product which contains the controlled commodities, which in the forestry case would be rubber or timber-based materials. The second-hand phrase is somewhat more problematic. Looking at the regulation, citation 40, and then also the FAQs, the phrase secondhand and the word used is linked to an end of life cycle arrangement. So if there is a secondhand product which has reached the end of its life cycle and would therefore be going into a waste stream, then that's obviously not within the regulation. So that then, as a raw material going forwards, would be treated as recycled. And I imagine, and maybe Constance can comment, I'm not a lawyer, but just selling things between each other so that they suddenly become secondhand would not get you out of the regulation, because if that was the case, there would be thousands of trading companies popping up which just sell things to each other and maybe scratch them a bit and things. So yeah, maybe Constance, you can confirm that. So.
No, I agree. To me, the completion of life cycle is a requirement of the EUDR regarding secondhand products. So it must otherwise be going to waste, except for products, byproducts, as the FAQ calls them, which are used again in certain ways, and there the EUDR, for example, uses fuel wood, so sawdust, for example, which can be used for firing or for many other purposes, I believe. But another important information here, if these byproducts which are used again, for example, for packaging, then the packaging exclusion of the EUDR applies. So if you would use the sawdust, for example, to ship certain products to the EU, and they would be used as a protection measure, then the exemption of the EUDR regarding packaging applies. But this only refers to packaging. Otherwise, if you would use it to fire your oven or something, then the sawdust would be included under the EUDR.
That would be interesting if you have used it for packaging and then you use it for something else, if that is end of life cycle or not. But I don't know. Maybe we don't find out today. I would suggest, since we have a few questions came in, so maybe that we answer those first before we return to prepared questions. So, for example, Gary Lawson asks, there are many detailed maps of forests worldwide, not just the JRC version. Who decides which 2020 maps are valid, e.g., which agroforestry areas are exempt? Yeah, that's a very good question. Does anyone, Rob, do you want to take? Otherwise, I can share my view on this. The first question in the chat.
I'm just going to find that in the chat. So, sorry, I'm not seeing it anyway. Yeah, so you're asking about sources of information in terms of maps to clarify deforestation, etc. Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but in the latest FAQs, there is a question which is how will monitoring of the regulation be implemented? And so the monitoring organisations in each of the 27 EU countries are being staffed up at the moment, and the staff are being trained. The European Union itself is putting out open source Sentinel satellite-based maps to everyone. They're not saying they will guarantee legal compliance, because the pixelation in certain circumstances is quite broad. So really, it comes down to individual risk and how the companies who have legal obligations, operators and traders within the European Union countries, read the regulation and feel that they have to comply. So I'm sorry for the very vague answer, but if you're sourcing from risky countries, and for example, complex tropical forests would meet that criteria, then you need to obtain for yourself enough accurate information to do your due diligence. So there are a range of mapping services out there. One of the problems is that quite a few of the maps which are being presented to the world, which they say or they can be perceived to track deforestation, actually track change in forest canopy, which is not the same as deforestation. So where you have trees being harvested and then the areas are regrown or replanted, some people get very confused and they look at some of these forest watch maps, etc., and they assume that because something's in a particular color or it's showing a particular shade, that is deforestation, and that's not the case. And obviously Livio is one of the technology companies which, here's the plug for you, is using AI and technology and human checking to tell the difference between normal forestry activity and actual deforestation. So sorry for the long answer, but it's not a black and white answer of, oh yes, just go to this source of information.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, so I want to give a humble recommendation here for our product, which is basically, so there's a difference between the different maps that sometimes also rely on different methodologies. So like Rob said, sometimes they cover tree cover loss. So where are trees removed, but maybe the land use of the specific plot of land did not change. So then it's not deforestation. So it's complex. What we do in our products, TradeAware, where we offer, we call it precision analytics. So we have our own proprietary AI models that check not worldwide, but on plot level, worldwide, but on plot level, not for the whole world at once. If there has been deforestation or degradation in the sense of the regulation, so following the wording of the regulation, which then is much more accurate than a much more accurate assessment than most maps can provide, especially if they don't follow the exact same definition of deforestation of the regulation.
Yeah, that's very important. I think that as Rob already mentioned, and Andreas, the definition of the EUDR regarding forest degradation and deforestation is the one that is the only reliable one and the only one you should use. So it's only the specific map always has to be backed up by the definition of the EUDR, and as the neither the EUDR nor the local authorities in the countries tell you a specific map which you would have to use, I guess on the one side it's a good thing, because then there is no only one way to use them, especially if they're not open source maps. But on the other hand, it's probably, I can imagine it's a bit difficult and confusing to understand which map explicitly takes into consideration the definitions of the EUDR. But what I guess we all can say is that the more precise the maps are, the better, which also includes that I would always say that you shouldn't only rely on one map, but also look at different ones, and the more information and the more precise information from the year 2020 and so on you receive, the better.
Perfect. Thank you. Then let's move on to the next question. There's one from G. Otten. The question is it allowed to let an independent third party research the due diligence investigation of in brackets, our supplier, and then import products based on the assessment outcome if negligible risk and additional received Article 9 info? So, Constanze, I think that's one for you.
Yeah, so the answer is yes, of course, that's allowed, and that's what many companies are doing. We also offer that for our clients to conduct supplier checks, as we call that. So the companies still have to gather the information from their suppliers, obviously, because they are the only ones that have the kind of information. But if you gather this information and give it to a third party and let that third party do the risk assessment for you, that's fine. However, what is important to understand that the EUDR explicitly says that you cannot get rid of your how do you say the
legal obligations.
exactly legal obligations, the liability there. Thank you very much. You cannot give that liability away from you only because you let a third party conduct your risk assessment. So after all, you're the one liable. So if the authority checks your company, for example, because you're an operator or a trader, and you cannot give them enough proof that this risk assessment was conducted correctly, for example, or that all the information was gathered, then it's after all you as the operator or trader that's liable. However, it's of course possible, and oftentimes it makes sense to outsource that risk assessment.
Yeah, maybe also an important note here is that one approach to the legality checks of suppliers that we see on the market sometimes is completely automated checks where no human ever looks at any document or any information given by suppliers. For example, just relying on country risk databases and so forth, or maybe on purely AI generated assessments. What we've heard from the competent national authorities in different countries, so we asked, is that this completely automated check where nobody ever looks at the answers in the documents cannot be considered exercising proper due diligence.
And I just saw the follow-up question
Yeah.
from Mr. Otten, so that's probably the answer to that. Under no way I would give you the suggestion to just rely on your supplier, which did the risk assessment for you and says, well, we're EUDR compliant, because that's exactly what is not sufficient, and what you should not rely on, just your supplier saying he's EUDR compliant. That would be too risky.
And there also one thing that I feel is little known is that companies are required to publish their information on their due diligence system that they have in place. For example, on the website, non-SMEs at least. Many people don't know that.
Yeah, exactly. That's once a year. Operators are required to publish that kind of information publicly. Yeah.
Okay. We had two follow-up questions on the recycled secondhand material. So one is and a question by Cyrus. For clarity on the recycled material exemption, is this only applicable to post-consumer waste streams and not to waste that results from the production process itself? So I think this is, for example, something you produce paper and then there's residual paper flakes or I don't know, fiber that is put back in basically at a later stage, maybe, for example.
I can take this, yeah. So there are ISO standards which deal with waste definitions. And so things which are generally in the forestry industry called byproducts or co-products, which could be, for example, sawdust or bark, they're not generally considered to be waste because they can go on to make other products, as Constance was saying. And if you can put something back into a manufacturing process because it's been spat out, so a mill broke, for example, in a paper mill or a pulp mill, should not be treated as waste because it can be put back into the process. In most developed countries, if something, and there's another question here about how to prove that material is waste, most things that have entered a waste stream will have a waste transfer note, and in EU countries there are regulations covering this. In lots of other developed countries, waste legislation includes things like waste transfer notes. The benefit of certification, so PEFC certification, for example, we have a PEFC recycled category, and anyone dealing with recycled material has to have proof. It could be documentary or photographic proof that this material is actually waste or is recycled. And so claims coming through the system as PEFC recycled, there will be backup due diligence information in the supply chain to demonstrate that. FSC, as the other big global certification organization, has a standard on this, and they work in a similar way. So people should be very careful if they're ordering apparent recycled or waste materials from abroad to make sure that the legality and the identification of that material is bona fide. But within developed countries and within within the economic north, most of that is fairly heavily regulated.
Okay. Maybe then quickly to clarify on this, it was one of the first questions. The definition of plot. Robert asked, what is meant by plot? The polygon that is registered in country X and where the wood is taken from? Question mark. Because speaking of the approach to have huge geometries stand for referring to harvested places. I think, yeah.
Yeah, the first one was correct. So the specific geolocation data where the product was grown on, or the commodity was grown on, which was then used to produce the product. Yeah.
Does it have to be a legal unit, like for example?
The plot is a defined term within the regulation, but it refers to the area of land where the trees were grown. But it can be a subdivision of an ownership, so it's not necessarily the whole ownership, but it's where the activity took place. The one linked simplification and matter which has been around for a while now is this concept of over-reporting on your origin sources. So you can oversupply geolocation data. If the area or the plot is smaller than 4 hectares, you can just supply one geolocation dot. If it's bigger than 4 hectares, you have to draw a polygon and supply the actual corners of the shape. But if you're in a low-risk country, there's nothing wrong with a supplier saying, here are 10,000 plots where I sourced trees from in the last X months, and then passing those on down the line to their customers. The danger is if you adopt that practice in high-risk sourcing areas, then you're introducing risk into the supply chain, and some of your customers may not be happy with that. So there is this balancing act going on at the moment, and this is where the political pressure is coming from for the zero risk category. Quite a lot of the commercial operators in the EU don't want the burden of obtaining and sharing all this data, but at the moment that's what they have to do, and over reporting carries with it significant risk in certain scenarios. Sorry, I maybe answered a different question there, but it's all linked.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. Okay, then I think the next one is probably for you, Constanze. So I'm the third, so it's an interesting construct. I am the third actor in the supply chain. The first one is a forest owner, and the second one is an SME, which is not doesn't have obligations until June next year. So, and the question is, how would I receive the information of geolocation, or I guess any other information, because the middle actor, so to speak, is not doesn't have obligations yet.
Yeah, that's a common problem, and sometimes I feel like when the EUDR was drafted, then these quite practical points were not taken into account here, because what is clear is that if you're the third actor in the supply chain and you're not an SME, then you have to comply by 30th of December 2025. Doesn't matter if there is an SME before you or not, which then indirectly leads to the circumstance that the SME that the SME has to be ready by the end of 2025 as well. So this is, I guess, the analysis or the answer which has also been backed up by the authorities. Then it's just bad luck, I would say, for the SME in the middle, because you would have to receive that kind of information from the SME. Yeah,
it's a bit like even the China case, and generally for actors outside of the EU who don't have obligations. But of course, if you want to sell to a company that has obligations and needs the data, then you have economic pressure, let's say, to provide the data, even if you have no obligations officially.
Yeah, for sure.
And if I can just add to that, the other complication is that if the forest owner is inside the European Union, so therefore that's why they are a first placer on the market and they have to create a due diligence statement and upload to traces, they get an opportunity, or their agent gets an opportunity, to tick or untick boxes in terms of can that information be shared. So if in traces the information has been ticked to be shared, then that does make it easier to pass this information on. There are also some questions, FAQs on simplification, and in terms of like who can rely on what when you have a due diligence statement with a reference number going down the supply chain. So it's worth people reading those and trying to understand them. But if the next customer on down the line, the third customer, is not an SME, then of course their purchasing policy will dictate what they need. So all these SMEs in the middle are going to be captured, absolutely.
And I think you also pretty much answered the follow-up question. So if the reference number of the due diligence statement is enough, I would say you can reference it. If the SME passes on the reference number, that should be no problem, and the SME shouldn't be required to ascertain that due diligence has been carried out. Maybe the next actor has to. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not sure if that was confusing. So if there's a reference number from the first DDS and they pass it on to the SME passes it on without checking if it exists, then the next actor probably needs to check if it exists and traces, and then it should be fine, I suppose.
Yes, and Constance can keep me right on this, but if the next actor is not an SME and is using, say, for example, raw materials from a supplier to then create a product, and they need to create a due diligence statement, they will have obligations and liabilities. So they will need to go back and check all this information. If they go to traces and the keep it confidential box has been ticked, then they then need to go back up the supply chain and figure out what the story is, because they have a legal obligation to do so.
Yeah, that's also my understanding. Yeah.
Okay, then we can quickly speak about traces, because there was one question whether traces will be operational by the end of the year. And as far as I know, at least the demo environment is live, so we use it. So from our application TradeAware, you can already now today send due diligence statements to the demo environment, and that works without problem, even though there have been some hiccups on the platform. That's also an interesting topic in itself. So there have been days where it was down and not accessible, and who knows what that would lead to in next year when trade flows depend on it. But as far as I know, it's not perceived as a high risk that the platform is not going to be ready anymore. I don't know if you've heard something different. Oh.
No, my understanding is it's operational. And to answer the other question, operators who are based outside the EU can now apply to get access to traces. So that's the question's worded slightly differently, but I think the answer is you can now get access to traces if you are an operator which is located out with the EU. So whether the platform holds up in early January remains to be seen, but I'm sure they're piling lots of money into it. So
Let's hope so. I mean, about the uptime, maybe not the money, but okay, maybe because there was one last question that I think, so we are almost out of time. And I think I saw it somewhere else about the new rumors about the EUDR being postponed more, or the benchmarking being revised. So we discussed it in the beginning, but basically I think the verdict pretty much was, we don't know. It doesn't look like it. It seems like a big political risk to reopen the legislation, so that's very unlikely. And that we see the best companies can do is maybe you can share this advice as your advice, maybe, to conclude the session today.
Yeah, don't take too much energy in reading up about the rumors, but better prepare, and taking into account that at least myself don't expect any delay after 30th of December 2025.
Rob, also any last advice?
Just a news bulletin. PEFC, we're looking to roll out at the moment non-accredited certification of our EUDR module because we've been suffering delays with approval of that in the EA, in the European Accreditation Zone, which is getting very technical now. But the other thing I would say is that this is a huge data and technology issue. So I would recommend, obviously, people to look at certification because it certainly helps. It gives reassurance to the monitoring authorities, and we've had lots of discussions on this, but also take a look at technology solutions such as LiveEO, because these are huge data sets, and the only way to deal with these is through technology. Trying to create manual solutions in busy supply chains is not really the solution going forwards.
Beautiful. Then we're slightly over time. I'd like to thank you both and everybody who tuned in and asked questions. Yeah, thanks all, and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.